Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for joining us. Well, your data might be compromised, but first, child abuse, it's getting worse. Back in a few moments.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
All right, joining me to talk about many aspects of child abuse is Angela Liddle. She is the president of the Pennsylvania Family Support Alliance. Angela, welcome back.
Thank you, Terry. Nice to see you.
All right, I'll tell you something. Almost every day you read something about child abuse, not just in the state, but all over the country. But in our state, the reports they just keep coming. So is it in fact going up, or is it remaining about the same?
Likely a combination of both. We have more folks aware, thanks to good partners in the media who keep this issue front and center. And so we have more folks who are involved and know how to report it. But the other side is, last year we had unprecedented numbers of children killed, 73 fatalities in Pennsylvania as a result of child abuse, and more than 100 near fatalities. So unprecedented historical numbers and not good ones.
Yeah. Well, the numbers that you get the numbers, what, from the, I'm looking here, Pennsylvania Department of Human Services. They have a report that they produce every year.
Annual report.
Yeah. How important is that report?
It's really important because it shows us by county child abuse data. It shows us then the big picture for the whole state. So we see the number of reports. I'll tell you a highlight, something positive in that report, is that we have more and more increasing numbers of community members, which is very important. Folks who are stepping up. They're not required by law to report child abuse, but of course anyone can. Mm-hmm. And we have more members of the general population concerned about children and making reports when they believe they're not safe.
When we talk about child abuse, what does that entail?
Yeah, it's very complicated and too much for today's discussion. But the bottom line is, if you believe a child isn't safe, and you either see that or you hear that, someone tells you that, or in some cases, a child will disclose abuse. You believe them, and then you do the right thing and you report. And you do that to Childline at 1-800-932-0313. So
overall, in the last couple of years, would you say that the question here is, it's getting more reported? You know, and I do agree. Again, as I mentioned earlier, you read stuff in the newspaper, you see it on TV, you hear it on radio. I mean, the fact of the matter is that it is now being much more reported. You think that the levels have really gone up. See where I'm heading with this? Yeah. Are the levels going up, the numbers, I should say, or is it just getting reported more?
As I said, I think it's a combination of both. Yeah. And I think this is really impacted too by the pandemic. So in truth, last year our numbers of reports actually went down a little bit because most of our children, weren't in school the full year. Mandated reporters, your bus drivers, your teachers, your doctors, your dentists, they're the folks who make the largest number of reports. Children weren't seen by them. So the reports went down a little bit. But the reports that were made were actually better reports in terms of they were substantiated as child abuse cases.
Yeah, one aspect of it that we don't think about, we think of it being, concerted and positive aspects. By that I mean, that it's something confrontational. But it's also the exact opposite, the neglect, isn't it? The neglect of children.
It is, and that's really where the focus right now, we're paying a lot of attention to that as a state in the child welfare system. There were 117 near fatalities in 2020. Most of those were the result of neglect, more than half. Children who were ingesting prescription meds, over-the-counter meds, cleaning solutions in homes, getting into unsecured firearms, drownings. This all is in some ways sort of predictable and understandable when you think of what parents have been through during the pandemic. Loss of child care, school not in session, trying to do their jobs by Zoom. But it all speaks to the need for, number one, parents to have more support, more education, and for family members, extended family members, to be involved to the best of their ability, and for community members to come together and look out for kids' safety.
I mean, normally you would think that it's something going on, abuse, that you can obviously recognize. You normally, again, don't think of it as being neglect. It's something that happens, you know, over. Go ahead.
Well, you're right about that, and we have to remember, too, that still the category of abuse that is the most prominent in Pennsylvania and really throughout the country is sexual abuse. So where does that take us? Take us to, we have to have really good, strong laws that are consistently applied. We have to have a zero tolerance as a society. We have to hold people accountable. And we have to be really vigilant, looking out for kids, not just our own, but those in our neighborhood, those in a work setting.
All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back 10 years later, post-Sandusky, this ought to be very important.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Well, believe it or not, it's been 10 years since the public learned about the investigation into Jerry Sandusky at Pennsylvania State University, Penn State as we call it. And, you know, there was a lot of swift movement and a big reaction to it. So where does all that stand 10 years later?
Well, I think we look now, 10 years later, and look at what are the takeaways from that time. And we learned very quickly in that situation that someone who looks like a good father and a good grandfather, good member of the community, athletic coach, is not necessarily a safe person. So that was a big takeaway for us as a state. I think the other thing was we learned very quickly that individuals in their profession and sometimes institutions will in fact protect themselves even at the expense of a child's safety, and that very clearly happened here. So there was great bipartisan work. We ended up strengthening our Child Protective Services law, and there was a lot of amendments made to that law, and we were really honored to be a part of all of that change at Pennsylvania Family Support Alliance. We cast the net wider, Terry, so now we're capturing volunteers as mandated reporters under the law. So if you volunteer with Big Brothers Big Sisters, or you coach a softball team or a t-ball team, if you work and volunteer with Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, you're now a mandated reporter. That's important because they're held to a higher standard of accountability. We also put into place training requirements. How wonderful is that? So now we're going to say not only are you accountable and responsible to report abuse if you suspect it, but we're going to actually train you and make that a requirement of what's child abuse involved in Pennsylvania. What does it mean? How do you identify it? And more importantly, how do you properly report it? So a lot of good came from that.
And you're moving forward. I mean, you provided me with some information of, you know, what can be done moving forward. And as I look at them, they make a lot of sense to me. Talk about some of them.
Yeah, you know, one of the things we have to really look at again is to continue providing people with education and training so they know what to look for. We have to continue to get community members involved saying, it's okay, really, if you don't ring the alarm bell, who will? So look out for kids' safety, and here's what you can do if you think they're not safe. And then I think a big focus right now is we've got to look at workforce development within the child welfare system, making sure that it's resourced more adequately. that there's ongoing training and mentoring and education for those young folks who are going into these very important jobs in our county child welfare system, and then also pumping more money into prevention services.
Yeah.
These families and our families in these communities of throughout the state are having really very complicated issues they're dealing with. The opioid addiction, the impact of the pandemic, loss of income, loss of life, more and more grandparents raising their grandkids.
It's hard to think about anything more important than our kids, than our children.
Correct.
And making them safe. I mean, that ought to be something that there's no disagreement on, that we all as a society come together and say, this has got to stop. And sometimes the people who are doing it, I don't want to excuse them, it's out of ignorance. Some of it's just out of ignorance about how to treat kids, how to give them the kind of support that they need. And am I right or wrong?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that there is uniform agreement in Pennsylvania that children should be valued and cared for and protected. But I think the agreement stops at that point.
Sure.
And there's a lot of disagreement about the how do you do that and at what cost. And that's where everything kind of goes into the political arena. And you just hope this issue wouldn't, but it does. And so we have to keep working at that.
All right, thanks for coming on. I appreciate the information. All right, coming up, we're going to talk about data breaches, but we're also going to talk about debit and credit cards and consumer protection. And we'll get to those subjects after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by CrossState Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Welcome back, where we're going to talk about data breaches, ransomware, and one subject that I'm really interested in is that with credit cards, debit cards as well, where does that all go? And joining me to chat about that, I'm looking across here at George Rudolph. He's the CEO of the Pennsylvania State Employee Credit Union. You're located in Harrisburg. And of course, Patrick Conway, he's been on the show many times. He's the president and CEO of CrossState Credit Union Association. I think I got all that right.
You got it. You got
okay. Hey, gentlemen, well, let's start. Let's start with data breaches. First of all, what is a data breach?
Data breach is rampant today, and it's basically a loss of information. You know, the fraudsters that are out there today are taking your social security number, your driver's license number, date of birth, and they're piecing these things together, and it's a real problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll tell you, it's unbelievable, even though if you go somewhere and you want to buy something or you do something on credit and they say, well, give me your social security number. I say, no way, no how. If you want the last four digits, go ahead, take it.
There you go.
You want the last four digits, I'll give you that.
And Terry, that's exactly what you need to do, is be cautious and alert and not just give things up easily. So
yeah. Well, why don't you go through a couple of these that you say have been really compromised? 4 billion records, Facebook. Go ahead, talk about it.
Yeah, so sadly, it's another record year for breaches, and so more than 4 billion records have been compromised this year alone. Everything from Facebook to Geico and Hobby Lobby, you name it. So, and what's kind of interesting, you might say, well, who cares, about Facebook? What are they going to do? Break into my account and find out who my friends are, things like that. But the problem is when some of that information is breached, it can be used in other places, because sometimes what we do, of course, is share credentials and use common passwords among them. So a bad practice. If you're doing that, you're going to need to rethink that a little bit.
No, that's a good point. All right, Patrick, and here's something that I think is also very important and critical to understand. It can happen in almost any place in any industry.
That's correct. 43% of data breaches occur in healthcare today. 34% from business, mostly in the retail sector.
Right.
10% from government, 9% from education, 3% from financial sector. So it's really all over the board,
Sure.
and it's 2022 will be a record year, as George said. And credit unions and community banks are advising their their consumers to be cautious.
All right, what's ransomware?
Ransomware is when basically a business, large or small, is held hostage. The systems that they use are basically locked up, or some of the data they use is locked up, and then they hold it hostage for ransom. So, and those can be very, very expensive for businesses to get access back to their data. There's some other interesting things going on too, though, Terry. One of these things we call credential stuffing, and you might say, "What in the world is that?" So this credential stuffing, as I mentioned, what happens is that the credentials are stolen from various sources, as we talked about a couple minutes ago, and then what they do is they try those against financial institutions. Those credentials, and what they're looking for is if they put millions of them against the financial institution's website, some of them will actually be customers or members, in our case at PSECU, and they'll actually get into a few accounts. So they're basically attempting millions and millions of these stolen records, and they'll get through on a few of them.
All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, I want to talk about the use of debit and credit cards. It's almost like cash is going away. And it's all credit in some form, correct? All right, we'll do that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine.
All right, the use of debit and credit cards, we're going to take that up. All right, Patrick, let's go.
Well, people are using credit and debit cards more than ever before. Back in 1980, 15% of purchases were used with a card. Mm-hmm. Today, that number is well over 70%.
Wow.
It's convenient, it's very safe, and we're seeing more consumers, moving in that direction. So cash transactions are down. We're seeing that use of credit and debit cards continue to increase each year.
Yeah, and as I said before, who knows about money, right? Whether we even are even going to need it. All right, well, you are involved in, let me put it this way, in doing investigations and trying to find out exactly how it works and what you can do about it.
Yeah, so let me back up here. So that increasing use, of course, of debit and credit cards means that it's a target, a big target for people trying to commit fraud. So, but the good news is there's some protections in place, and there's some things that the consumer can do in order to protect themselves. So, first of all,
well, how do they do this? I mean, how do they rob you? And that's, I think I'm being accurate because they're robbing you. Go ahead. How do they do it with the cards?
Yeah, so a lot of times those cards are stolen through a variety of sources. So they may be compromised from a site like we talked about before. They might be compromised through skimming at an ATM or at a particular merchant. So, and the sad part about it is there's just millions and millions of card numbers out there.
Yeah.
There's actually sites on the dark web where you can buy batches of them.
So you don't need the card itself, correct?
You do not need the card yourself. If you've got the number, you can use that on certain sites and manufacture basically a set of cards to be used or sold to be used by people who are committing fraud. So it's big business. Such a big business, like I said, that there's actually sites out there on the dark web where they sell batches of card numbers. Sure. But again, all hope's not lost, right? So there's things that are in place to protect the consumer.
How do we stop it? What needs to be done? Either one of you.
Yeah. So first of all, I think that the most important thing is to be alert and to watch your account and watch for transactions. And most institutions, and certainly including PSECU, we have the ability for you to be able to do that on your mobile application from your pocket or from our online banking site, so you can actually watch in near real time the transactions that are happening. If you see something that looks suspicious, that doesn't look right, what you need to do is contact the financial institution. And the reason why is because actually on most Visa and MasterCard debit and credit cards, for example, there's no there's no liability for the consumer as long as that's reported in a timely fashion. So I think that's a really, really important point is monitor your accounts.
Right.
And if you see something that looks abnormal, reach out to the financial institution.
So your point,
will help you.
The point is, and I'll go to you, Patrick, is that you should look over your monthly account statements. You should review your credit reports. You should get go ahead.
That's right. And reviewing your credit report at least once or twice a year is an important point. And as you and George both stated, checking your monthly statements, you've just got to be aware. And if you see something that doesn't look right, report it. Contact your financial institution.
Yeah. And so there are tools in the marketplace that can help you protect yourself, correct?
Yeah, certainly are tools in the marketplace that can help you to protect yourself. So there's credit monitoring services. And also behind the scenes, we're doing a lot of things to protect the consumer as well. So we're watching transactions if we see abnormal transactions. Unfortunately, sometimes we shut them down, and then they're not abnormal transactions. But as long as you contact us and let us know, no, that was a normal transaction, then we can continue to let you use your card because we want you to use your card, right? We don't want to have to stop a transaction.
Oh, sure.
But we are protecting you behind the scenes, and again, I think that the key from the consumer's perspective still, though, is to watch your transactions. And you don't need to wait for your monthly statement. If you've got the free online banking application or mobile application, you can watch what you did today, what happened an hour ago. You can sign up for alerts.
Right. There's another feature to this, and that is we have a lot of young people who are getting credit cards, it seems to me, at an earlier age. I don't know what the minimum age is. But the fact of the matter is there needs to be a good bit of education in terms of how to use this. It's not something we think about normally when we think about what goes on in schools. And I'm not just trying to add another subject for schools to deal with, but you get the point, right?
That's a great point. And credit unions do a lot of financial training in the schools, teaching young adults about financial responsibility. How to use credit and debit cards is really important. Use of credit and debit cards is very safe, and there's zero liability for the consumer. The financial institutions, including our credit unions, handle that for our consumers. So that's an important factor, but you've got to be smart about it, and protect yourself.
Yeah. Well, look, this has been a great discussion, and this is an important topic. I think we need to do more with it, and to make sure that virtually everyone is informed about it. And I want to thank you for coming on and providing this really important and helpful information. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.